hope you can sing that genuinely. God has been so good to you, even if it's not good now. I hope you have the kind of faith that keeps a tally of the good that God has given you and done for you and been for you in your life. Singing that even when it hurts, it's important to your faith. Well, hey, before we jump in today, we're starting a new series. I wanted to give you a little update on how Thursday is going. So if you don't know, we started church on Thursday, and our heart behind that was that, well, one, we wanted to provide empty seats because we think empty seats represent people who need God, need faith in their life. So Thursday was a way for us to do that. And then we also know that like 30% of the workforce works on the weekend. So we wanted to meet some people where they were at and say, hey, let's provide a space for them. So we've been going for about 6 weeks here, and we're averaging about 120 people on Thursdays, which is really cool. You should clap. Yeah, clap for that. Good. And that's not even, listen, we're not even doing pastor math. I know you've heard of girl math. There's pastor math. We count pregnant people twice, and if you drive by really slow, we'll count you too. So we're not doing any of that. We're just normal. And if you don't know, the average church in America has about 60 people, so it's really cool. We've got 120 showing up on Thursdays. We're really excited about that. Part of the reason I wanted to remind you of that is, one, hey, if you're busy on the weekends, we got another option. You can still be a part of the church during that week. And two, still want to put you on mission to be inviting people to that. We've got room for people that God has in your life who maybe can't come on a Sunday, far from God, close to you, that he wants to use you to be that invite to that. So just keep that in mind, pray about that, think about that, find a way to not be weird and invite people to church. I promise you can do it. You can do it. All right, so I wanted to talk this morning about one of the most important things about you. And there's a lot of important things about you, right? Like if you're thinking about like what makes you, like your IQ, however high or low that may be, your good looks, who your parents are, what kind of opportunity has been put before you in your life. There's a lot of things that kind of like make you, so to speak. But the thing we're going to talk about here, it should be on the list of really, really important things about you. It should be really high up there, because this thing, man, it's going to dictate a lot of the way your life goes. It's going to dictate a lot of the way your relationships go. It's going to dictate your health and your growth and your progress in your life. It's really, really important, and it's underrated. Like I think a lot of people don't appreciate how important this aspect of you is. I think a lot of people, if you ask them about important things about themselves, this wouldn't be on the list, but it should be. It should be. The thing we're going to talk about today and for the rest of the month is your relationship to failure. Your relationship to failure. How you think about failure before it happens in your life, how you handle it when you're in the midst of it, and then how you process it when you come out of it. Your relationship to failure. These things, man, it will shape you. And the reason this is so important for you is I have some, maybe, depending on how you think, bad news for you. In your life, possibly before you make it out of today, you will fail. You're not going to be able to avoid that. And I know the type A's, the competitive people in the room, like, watch me, like I'm gonna try. Like, okay, you can try, but you're going to fail. This is going to be a thing that happens in your life. You're going to experience it. And it can be a big thing, it can be little things, right? You could fail and lose a job. You could fail and lose a relationship. You could fail and lose a house or a car. You could fail and lose your health. It can be really, really big things. And it can be little things too, right? You failed a conversation. You know, introvert, you understand this, right? I feel like an idiot. What did I just say that? Why did I just do that? Why did the handshake or the fist bump? We did both. I don't feel like an idiot, right? Failure, little thing. You could fail, backing your car up and denting somebody else's bumper or your bumper. It's my wife. I was talking to her first service. She said amen to that. You could fail at not eating the piece of cake. You could fail at, not working out like you thought you wanted to, or not getting up at the time. You will fail At big things, you will fail. At little things. And since that's true, if we're just all on the same page, if you at least agree with the premise that you're going to fail in your life, then that means that you need to have, I would say, a good relationship with failure. And I don't mean that you love it, embrace it, like I'm just going to be a loser now from now on. I don't mean it like that. But I mean, when you think about failure, I want you to have a good, godly, right thoughts about failure. I want your thinking to be correct about this. So the beginning question here for you is, what is your relationship with failure? How do you think about that? So what we're going to look at today is a story that shows that the people of Israel did not have a healthy relationship with failure. This story happens when the people of Israel have now, they're standing on the edge of what is called the Promised Land. And the reason it's called the Promised Land is because God promised them this land. And they've traveled up to the edge of it, and they're standing on the border. They're looking into this land that God has said, I'm going to give this to you. And it's a good land, the land where they're supposed to be. And they're not in it. They're on the border. And I just want to acknowledge that maybe that's how you feel right now. Like maybe you're standing on the edge of what God wants for you in your life. Like you're not in it, you're on the edge of it. You can see it, maybe you can smell it, you can taste it, but you're not in it. I just want to acknowledge that can be a frustrating place to be, that you're standing on the edge of something, that you're not in the thing, you're looking at the thing, you're longing for the thing, you want the thing, but you're not in it, you're not possessing it. But God stopped them. I want you to know, they were moving, man, and they stopped at the edge on purpose. God wanted them to pause before they went in. And I think that happens sometimes. And I guess I want to kind of encourage you in that. If you're standing at the edge of something, sometimes God pauses us before we go into it because he wants to do something. Now, what happens here isn't great for them. And this is the thing we got to watch out for. So what God does is he tells Moses, who's leading the people of Israel at the time, that they're going to send 12 spies in, 12 scouts to scout out the land and see what it looks like. So these 12 guys go in, and they're there for 40 days. They're checking out this whole land that God has told the people of Israel, this is what I want for you. And 40 days seems a long time, but remember, they didn't have cars or anything, so they're walking, they're trucking it through this whole thing. And they come back and they give a report about what the land was like. And that's what I want to look at this morning. The report starts in Numbers 13:27. This was their report to Moses. We entered the land you sent us to explore, and it is indeed a bountiful country, a land flowing with milk and honey. Here is the kind of fruit it produces. So they're like, hey, this land's awesome, milk, honey, and then they want to show them the kind of fruit, and we got to back up a couple of verses so I can show you the kind of fruit that they pull out here to Moses and the people of Israel. It's verse 23, check this out. When they came to the valley of Eshcol, they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes so large that it took 2 of them to carry it on a pole between them. Can you imagine a cluster of grapes that takes 2 grown men, a pole between them, how big the grapes must have been for them to do that? Can you imagine how much that would be at the grocery store right now? Beep, that'll be $7,000, sir. I'm sorry, that's just how much grapes are now. We don't even eat fruit anymore. I'm like, I don't care if it's bad for my kids or not. We just don't do it because it's too expensive. But they carry this thing back between 2 people. So all that to say that the land is exactly as God told them it was going to be. It is a bountiful land. It is a good land. It is a fertile land. It's not some kind of barren wasteland kind of a thing. This land produces. It's desirable. So that's a part of the scouting report. So far, so good, right? Now, once you've given good news, the next verse, unfortunately, starts with the word but, which is not great coming after good news. So here's what they say. But the people living there are powerful, and their towns are large and fortified. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. So it's occupied. It's good, but it's occupied. It's good, but there's already people there. It's good, but there's enemies there. It's good, but there's fortified cities there. It's good, but there's giants there. And to that, I want to say, duh. Of course there are. If you encounter a land that's good, if it's good, if it's resourceful, if it's bountiful, of course there's going to be people there. Of course there's going to be opposition to you coming into that land. And for me, this is a really important principle. We talked about this before, but I want you, if you are a Christian, your mentality should account for this. As in, if God calls you to something, don't expect for you to be able to just walk into it. You should expect to fight. Anytime God calls us to something, you're going to have to fight for it, right? If God calls you to a good and healthy marriage, you're going to have to fight for that. You're not just going to hand it to you. If you want, to graduate from college and pursue that career, you're going to have to fight for that. If you want to serve God and pursue ministry and a calling, you're going to have to fight for that. You should expect opposition when going in the direction that God has called you. I call it the video game principle. If you've ever played video games before and you don't know which direction to go, look for the enemies, and that's usually the right way. And it's kind of true in life. If you've got no opposition, I would say that's largely not the direction God wants you to go. So, there's enemies. Now, what happens is these 12 spies kind of split into two camps. It's very uneven. 10 on one side, 2 on the other. Two on the one side want to still go into the land. It's Caleb and Joshua, and then the other 10 are like, I don't know about that. Now, here's the thing. Both groups here, all 12 guys experience the same thing, right? They observe the same thing. Milk and honey, giant produce, right? And giants and cities and gates that we're afraid of. Like, they experience the same thing. They're reporting the same thing, but they have a different interpretation of that, right? They're same experience, different, what does this mean to us? And Caleb and Joshua are not deterred by the giants. Numbers 13:30, get a little taste of Caleb here, his attitude. Caleb tried to quiet the people as they stood before Moses. Let's go at once and take the land, he said. We can certainly conquer it. So Caleb, he wants to go kick a giant in the shin. He doesn't care. He's like, let's go do this thing. I'm not afraid. I'm not intimidated. Let's go. God called us to do this. Let's go do this. Joshua is with him. But the other 10 have a slightly different interpretation of the thing that they all experienced. In verse 31 is where it starts. But the other men who explored the land with him disagreed. We can't go up against them. They are stronger than we are. So they spread this bad report about the land among the Israelites. The land we traveled through and explored will devour anyone who goes to live there. All the people we saw there were huge. And then verse 33 is a wild verse. We even saw giants there, the descendants of Anak. Next to them, we felt like grasshoppers, and that's what they thought too. Okay, interesting, right? So the 2 want to go pick a fight. The 10 say, no, we can't go. So what are these 10 guys afraid of? What are they afraid of? Giants? Yeah. I'd say that's the right answer. But it's not like giants. It's what the giants would do to them, right? They're afraid of getting squished. They're afraid of getting stepped on. They're afraid of getting turned into a stew. I don't know. Like, they're afraid of what's going to happen. They're afraid of failure. They fear failure. And this is the first aspect of your relationship with failure that I want to explore here. Do you fear failure? Before it happens, as you look at the possibility of failure in your life, do you fear failure? Israel here feared failure. These 10 guys feared failure. And what happens is it holds them back from attempting the thing that God told them to do. It sabotages their God-given potential. It limits them from becoming what God wanted them to become. And I wonder, is a fear of failure holding you back from the thing that God is calling you to do? Is it a fear of failure? Is fear of failure sabotaging your God-given potential? Is your fear of failure limiting you? Is that really the boundary in your life? It actually is marked by a fear of failure around the edges. And then the next question is, do you know yourself well enough to even be able to answer that? How well do you know you? Because I got to be honest, like, when I ask myself these questions, I, type A competitive, want to be like, no, that's not me. And I want to fight back on that and want to be like, this sermon must be for somebody else because it can't possibly be for me. But I have to stop. I have to pause. I have to question my assumptions there. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you a little test, fear of failure test, where if these things are true about you, it's a possibility that you have a fear of failure. It's self-graded, so you can cheat if you want, but it's up to you how you want to do this. This is supposed to help you know you. So if you have these things, first thing on the list, if you have these things, there's a possibility that you struggle with a fear of failure. Number one, perfectionism. You didn't see that coming, did you? You thought the perfectionists didn't have this. No. Perfectionists, they got to get everything right. They got to get everything right, got to get everything right. And some of the time, the reason for the perfectionism is a fear of failure. That's the fuel that gets put in the engine of perfectionism. And then, okay, so also with perfectionism comes its ugly stepsister, procrastination. Did you know they're related? They're related. If you have that, you probably know that. So procrastination, you don't even want to start because you don't want to fail. And you push it off because you don't want failure. Another one, you don't like to try new things specifically in front of others. I know that is also a symptom of being an introvert. But here, this is an important one because a lot of a fear of failure has to do with the way you think about how other people perceive you. So your fear of failure is actually born out of your I won't say obsession, but your thoughts on how other people think about you. And that's part of the reason you fear failure so much is because you don't want people to think thoughts about you that you don't like. So you would never want to try something new in front of other people because it's all about their perception. Here's another one. In the final stages of prep for something, you get nervous to the point of it affecting you physically. You don't have to raise your hand, but that's a rough one. Right at the edge, almost about to turn in that project, do that thing, turn that paper in, and all of a sudden you work yourself up to the point that you're gonna puke, you're gonna freak out, you're gonna have to go cry in the shower. Here's another one, super tangible. Staying in a job you hate. Now, there's, to be fair, a lot of reasons you could maybe do that, but one of them possibly is that you fear failure as you look to maybe pursue something else, so you stay there because it's safer. Last two, you try to manage people's expectation of you, as in you try to lower people's expectation if they're relying on you for something. Oh, this isn't gonna be very good. Hey, I'm probably gonna mess this up. You try to lower that bar so that you could jump over it. And then related to that, you're a pessimist. And the pessimist is the same thing. You're just lowering your own expectations so you don't fail you. All Browns fans do that. So I'm doing that today. Like, oh, we're playing a 1-7 team. We're probably gonna lose. Like, I'm trying to do that. Now, so that's the test. And if you take that test, and if enough of the things you're looking at, and you're like, oh, that's me too, oh, that's me, then you might struggle with this. Now, I think everybody has it to a certain extent. I don't think any of us are getting out of here saying, I don't have any fear of failure in my life at all. Where I worry is if you get to the point in your life where your fear of failure is now limiting you, where your fear of failure is actually dictating decisions and direction in your life, that's where I would say, hey, this is something you really need to look at. Does it stop you from reaching your potential? Does it limit you? Because here's what happens next in our story with the Israelites, and this is really important. Now, if you grew up in church, you already know the story, right? They walk up to the edge of the promised land. They send 12 spies in. 2 want to go, 10 say no, and everybody agrees with the 10, so they don't go into the promised land. And then what happens is they wander in a desert for 40 years. And it's poetic justice, right? God says, I sent spies in for 40 days. You're going to wander the desert a year for every day. Now think about that. 40 years in the desert. 40 years in a desert. I would say they became desert experts, right? Wandering superstars, right? They were elite level wanderers. They were survival professionals. You ask an Israelite, shoot, even 20 years in, they knew where every little tuft of grass was, every puddle where they could get water from. Here's the big rock, here's the small rock. They were experts on the desert. They were good at desert living. So here's what I want you to see. They succeeded in the desert because they were afraid to fail in the promised land. They succeeded in the desert because they were afraid to fail in the promised land. If I can reword that for us, many people succeed at something that they hate because they're afraid to fail at something they love. They succeed at something they strongly dislike because they're afraid to pursue something better. So let me ask you, are you succeeding at something that you hate, dislike, don't like, because you're afraid to fail at something that you love? Are you succeeding at a lesser life because you're afraid to pursue the life that God is calling you to? Are you succeeding at desert wandering in your life? You know where all the tufts of grass are. You know where all the puddles are in your life because you're afraid to go slay giants in the promised land. Are you succeeding at surviving because you're afraid to fail at living? And that's the difference, I would say. That's what the people of Israel chose. They chose to survive instead of live. The desert is survival. That's not living. And they did. They survived. They succeeded at surviving. But I don't think they lived. And I think that's what happens when you allow a fear of failure to get inside of you. You choose survival instead of living. Now, why did it happen? Why did it happen? Why did they turn around? Why did they get right to the edge? They walked right up to the border and said, no. Why? Look at where this fear of failure comes from. I want to back up to verse 33 again. I want to look at this close. Because again, if you grew up in church, you probably read this verse a bunch of times because it's a pretty common story. But this verse, it tripped me up because I read it and I'm like, wait a minute. So it says, we even saw the giants, their descendants of Anak. And this sentence right here, next to them we felt like grasshoppers, and that's what they thought too. The first part of the sentence makes sense. So if you're in this land and there's giants and you say, hey, I feel like a grasshopper. Okay, cool. Yeah, I get it. But then they say, and they thought it too. How did they know? Did they ask, do you think? Hey, do I look like a grasshopper to you? Like, how did that happen? I want to say, I think they're making some assumptions here. And what really happens here, the reason they walk away from the promised land, the reason they walk away from what God has for them, the reason they walk away from their potential, they didn't lose to the giants in the field. They lost to the grasshoppers in their head. This is where they lost. The first place they failed was here, and they didn't even know they did it. They didn't lose to the giant in a battle. They lost to a grasshopper in their own head. Grasshopper whooped them. Not on the battlefield, in their mind. That's where they lost. They decided they would fail before they even stepped foot onto the battlefield. So here's what I want to do. I want to talk about three things that I think if these guys knew it, if they had these three things like embedded into their hearts, they would have made a different decision. They wouldn't have walked up to the edge and then turned around. They would have stepped in and said, let's go fight some giants. Three things. And this is important for you. If you struggle with a fear of failure, if you were on that list, if you took the test and maybe you think you failed the failure test, this is really important to you. So first thing that they needed to know that I think would have helped with the fear of failure, it's kind of ironic. Fear of failure often creates the thing it fears. Fear of failure often creates the thing it fears. And I think in general, you probably understand this, right? And most of the time we understand that our mindset going into something greatly affects how we are when we're in the thing, right? You understand that principle, that what you carry in to the day dictates how the day goes, right? This is gonna be a terrible day. Well, you're probably right. You know, if you say that, it's probably gonna be true. And I want to apply that kind of an idea, the power of your mindset has on these things that you face. So when I was learning how to drive, my dad was the one who mainly taught me how to drive because my dad was chill and my mom was not, okay? So to explain what I mean when I say my mom was not chill, is she used to make a noise, and it's a deadly noise. Ladies, this is important. Here it is. You ready? It's this noise. That causes accidents, people. That doesn't prevent accidents. Do you know that does not prevent accidents? That causes accidents. And the funny thing is, my mom used to do it to me, so my dad's the one who taught me to drive. And now I married someone who does the same thing to me. And even worse, All the husbands are nodding their head. Don't nod too much, guys. I don't get you in trouble. But listen, my wife, she makes that noise. And she'll go, and she grabs my arm. My arm. I'm like, lady, what are you doing to me here? Again, just keep in mind that that sound creates, not prevents. Just important. But here's the thing my dad taught me. My dad specifically taught me this. He said, hey, early on, when you're learning how to drive, it's really important. He says, hey, careful where you look while you're driving because your hands will float to where your eyes go. You ever notice that happens if you teach someone how to drive? How they're like, oh, look, a deer, and they just start to drive towards the deer. It's not on purpose, but your hands kind of float in the direction of your eyes. And I think that idea is really important when it comes to the way we think about failure. The more you focus on a potential failure, honestly, I think the stronger your chances of experiencing it are. And if you compare the two groups, Caleb and Joshua were focused on what God said and God's promises and what God wanted them to do. That was their focus, and I think that was the way their life was. They were drifting towards that. But if you look at the way the 10 operated, they were so focused on their fear. And that's the again, hilariously ironic part about it. In avoiding one failure, they created a worse one, right? So yeah, they didn't get beat up by any giants. They didn't lose any battles, but they also didn't experience one day in the promised land in their life. So yeah, you avoided one failure and created a way worse one. And that's the thing I would caution you on in your life. If you use fear of failure as a navigation system, you're going to steer away from one thing and you're going to slam into another worse one. It doesn't work. Fear of failure often creates what it fears. That's the first thing. Now, second thing, again, if you struggle with the fear of failure, if you can get this. Now, I'm going to say it, and then I'm going to explain it. So don't call me a heretic before I explain it, all right? This is a sentence that requires some explanation, but I think you'll understand once I explain it, but at first it's going to be weird. You ready? God's will does not equal 100% success. God's will does not equal 100% success. Okay, let me explain. So specifically for the people of Israel, God said, hey, this is the promised land. I'm going to be with you. Go in and take it. I think that means that they were going to win the war because God said, I'm going to do it. I believe that God will do it. But I don't think that means that they're going to win every single battle. Okay? You're going to win the war doesn't mean you're going to win every single battle. There was going to be some giants that get some people. It was going to happen. There were going to be some casualties of war. There were. There were going to be some battles that they went into and did not come out of victoriously. You're going to win the war, but that doesn't mean you win every battle. And I can give you a couple of specific examples. One, they come back to the promised land, right? After the 40 years, they come back, and then Joshua's in charge, and they go in that time, right? They win one victory, and did you know they lose the second one? The second battle in, they lose. So yeah, they're 500, 2 battles in to the promised land that God promised that they would have. So I just want you to have this mentality, Christian, that even if God has called you to something doesn't mean you're going to win every single time. You're not. You're human. You're going to mess up. It wasn't God's fault that they lost that second battle, but they lost. And what I'm trying to do here is prevent you from doing the thing, and I think a lot of Christians do this, that you feel like you're called to something, you lose a little bit, and then you go, I guess I heard him wrong. Maybe God didn't call me to this. Maybe I had some bad pizza last night, and it wasn't actually the Holy Spirit that was moving around in my stomach. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't God. It couldn't have been God because I lost. Well, hold on a second. I want to share with you the most famous verse on calling in the Bible. And if you grew up in church, if you went to youth group growing up, you've heard this verse. You maybe even have a t-shirt with this verse on it. It is the most famous calling verse in the Bible. It is Isaiah 6:8. This is Isaiah speaking. Then I heard the Lord saying, whom should I send as a messenger to these people? Who will go for us? And I said, here am I, send me. Anybody? Okay, who had a t-shirt with that on? Anybody? Yeah, see? Okay, a couple of you did. Now, the reason this was talked about in youth group so much, and it does resonate with me, like the encouragement is, hey, if God's called you to something, if God's saying, hey, I'm trying to do something in this world, you want to be a part of it, raise your hand. Here am I, send me. That's a good thing. That's an attitude I would want for you to have. Hey, if God's putting out a call, you want to be the one to answer it. You want to be the volunteer, send me. Yes, yes, yes. But what I wish would have happened for me is I wish they would have read the next 2 verses, because I bet you don't know the next 2 verses. You knew that one. If you grew up in church, at least the part, here am I, send me, you're like, I've heard that before. And we put it on coffee mugs and we put it on t-shirts, and it's a really cool saying. But have you ever read the next 2 verses? The thing that he volunteered for? Well, let me read it to you. 9 and 10. And he said, this is God. Yes, go and say to this people, listen carefully, but do not understand. Watch closely, but learn nothing. Harden the hearts of these people. Plug their ears, shut their eyes. That way they will not see with their eyes, nor hear with their ears, nor understand with their hearts, and turn to me for healing. So in case you don't understand what God just said, hey, here's your calling. Go and preach to people, and they're not going to listen to you. Go and tell them what I think they should do, and they're not going to do it. Again, so I preach. Like, if I preached and no one listened, my conclusion would be, I think I heard wrong when I thought God called me to this. Maybe I'm supposed to do something else. Like, this can't be it if I'm a 0% success rate. But this is what God actually tells Isaiah. And if I'm Isaiah, I'm like, here am I, send me. And the God's like, hey, go preach, and nobody's going to listen. Be like, never mind. Actually, I don't want to do that. Like, that sounds awful. Can I change my mind? Because that sounds like a terrible thing. But God literally just called him and said, go preach, nobody's going to listen. Which by our standards would be failure. But if we just take that little section, just 3 verses here am I, send me, God definitely sent him, and he definitely failed, then what that means is we have to redefine how we talk about failure and success. Don't we have to redefine failure and success based off of this? That maybe true success and true failure is more, hey, success is saying yes to God. Failure is saying no to God. There you go. That's how you should define it now. Success, yes, Lord. Failure, God, I've got different plans. That should be our new definition. Failure to obey God is failure. And let me push it even further. Look at the cross. Christian, look at the cross. Did Jesus succeed on the cross? Well, from whose perspective? Rome. Would Rome say Jesus was a success? Rome got him. And if you get nailed to a cross, bloody, beaten, naked, bleed out, suffocate to death, nobody calls that a win. Nobody calls that a win. But if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, while that's happening in the physical, Jesus is conquering sin, Satan, death, and demons. He's providing forgiveness and salvation for the world, winning the biggest victory ever won, becoming King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He said yes to what God wanted him to do. So there's a sense in which if you have this grand fear of failure, well then let's lean into a little bit, then fear saying no to God. Fear that. I'll take that. I'll take that fear. You should be afraid to say no to God. Not because you're afraid he's going to get you with a lightning bolt, he's going to smite you, but because you're afraid to miss out on what he's going to do. Think about that again. Look, put it back in our story. These Israelites, these 10 scouts, they're afraid of what's going to happen if they say yes. They should have been more afraid of what was going to happen when they said no, what they would miss out on, the promised land that they missed out on. Redefine it. Redefine it. All right, third thing. You got to know this if you want to get over a fear of failure. Now, usually so let's say you were struggling with a fear of failure and you went to your Christian friend and you said, hey, I'm struggling with a fear of failure. What should I do? My guess is one of the things that would come up in that conversation is this word faith, right? Wouldn't you say that's probably going to come up? Or maybe you've been asked this before, like, hey, I'm struggling with fear of failure. Well, we're going to talk about faith. And usually, sometimes Christians, let's be honest, we're pretty crappy at this. We'll say something like, you just need to have faith. And we put the word just in there, like having faith is some kind of just easy thing that just comes naturally, especially in difficult conversations. Just have faith. And usually the kind of faith, and by the way, pro-faith, love faith, but let's define it. The kind of faith that's usually presented is a faith that, as in a faith that God will move, a faith that God will save, a faith that God will come through, a faith that God will provide. A faith that God. And if I may, that kind of faith has a focus on the thing that God's going to do, not on God himself. Can we be honest about that? When we have only faith that's focused on this outcome, this desired outcome that we want for God to pull off in our life, then we're more focused on the thing he's going to do than him. That's why, nope, don't have time for that. Sorry. There's a deeper level of faith than that. Now, I'm all about that kind of faith, by the way. I think that's cool if you have a kind of faith that I believe God's going to do it, and that's awesome. If you have that level of confidence, good. Lean into that. Keep that. I think there's a deeper one, though. There's a deeper one. It's not faith that God will fill in the blank. It's faith in God, period. Like, no matter what happens, period. So, different Bible story. If you grew up in church, you're super familiar with this. Remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Remember those guys? So if you don't remember them, they're the three guys who got thrown into the fiery furnace, okay? So story goes that these three Israelite boys are in this kingdom with this foreign king who's an egomaniac, and he builds a statue of himself and makes everybody bow down. I can't imagine a world where you had to follow a guy who actually thought like that. Anyways, nobody got it. Okay, wow. He builds a statue, says everybody has to bow down to it, and they say, hey, we can't do that. We worship God, not you. And they get in this conversation, and the king's super mad because he wants everybody to just obey him, and he has this attitude, and it's like, it's right for what it is because he is king. He's king of the world. His name's Nebuchadnezzar. He is absolutely that guy. Nobody can mess with him. He absolutely rules the known world, and he's like, hey, so you should bow down. Because if you don't, I'm going to throw you into this furnace that's really hot and you're going to die. And who could save you from me then? And it's kind of ominous. It kind of hangs in the air as this threat. But if there was anybody on the planet to say it, it's him. And these three Hebrew boys say back to him something absolutely amazing. It has three parts to it. The first thing they say is, hey, to answer your question, God. God could save us from you. God can do this thing. So they believe that God can. They believe that God can save them in this situation. And that's pretty crazy because they're in the middle of this kingdom. They go 50 miles in any direction and they're still under King Nebuchadnezzar's reign, but they believe that God can save them. And then even more spectacular than that, the second part of their faith is they say, and he will save us. They have an expectation that God is going to do this. And that's wild. Sometimes, I don't know Christian, sometimes I know God can do something, but I have a hard time expecting him to do it. But they had it. But then they also had the last part, and this is the part that we're after here today. They end this little mini speech with, but even if he doesn't, we're not gonna bow down. Even if you're gonna cook us, we're not doing it. It's an even if faith. It's a faith in God, period. It's a faith in God. Even if he doesn't do the thing that we really want him to do, really expect him to do, really hope that he does, we're still trusting him because this is the right thing to do. So let me ask you, which is a bigger God? Believing that God will do this thing that you want him to do and that he can do it, or believing in a God who is so big and so powerful and so wise that even if he doesn't do the thing that you think he should do, that maybe he's got about 400 other plans ready to go after that failure? Which one's bigger? He doesn't need to prevent the first failure. God's not thrown off by you messing up. Can I tell you this? God's not thrown off by you. He was not up in heaven going, oh my gosh, there's giants in the promised land. Oh man. If they would have went in and lost the first battle, God's like, we got to call a meeting of the angels. What are we going to do? These Israelites can't fight. I thought they could. Like, God's not going to be thrown off by that. He's not thrown off by your failures. He's not surprised by them, even if you are. He's not. He can handle them. God has 700,000 plans for you. One after each failure, he can pivot because he's not pivoting because he saw it coming. He saw it coming. He knows you better than you know you. So imagine this. Imagine living a life where, number one, you said, hey, I know that fear of failure creates the very thing that it fears, so that's dumb. And then also imagine that you maybe started to redefine what success and failure even is, that, hey, just because God's calling me to something doesn't mean I'm going to succeed 100% of the time, so I'm going to define success as saying yes, Lord, and define failure as saying no, Lord, and I'm going to lean into this success, yes, Lord. And then what if you believed in a God so big that you knew that whether he comes through or not, whether you succeed or not, whether you win or not, he's not thrown off by that. That he's got a plan for your life that takes into account your failure. And that you have a God who fiercely loves you, even in the midst of your failure. Is that the kind of God you believe in? Have you grown up in such a dysfunctional church that do you disagree with the sentence that the presence of God is the safest place for you to fail? Does that scare you a little bit? I mean, it scares me a little bit because God is high and lifted up and I don't want to fail in front of him, but I promise it's the safest place to fail. It's the safest place to fail in the presence of almighty, loving God who fiercely, fiercely loves you in the midst of your failures. He's not turned off by it. He's not telling you to get out. He wants you there. He wants you with him. He loves you even in the midst of those failures. Man, if you knew that, you're not going to be afraid of failure anymore. Pray with me. God, I pray for the person right now who, when I asked, what's your relationship with failure, they tensed up a little bit. Or maybe they had a little sting of pain inside of them. Pray for the person who really struggles with that fear, Lord. I pray for the person who could acknowledge right now that a fear of failure has held them back in their life, that's kept them limited, that they've not reached their potential that you placed inside of them because of this fear, Lord. I pray that you would meet them right here, right now, that they would know that you love them, that they would know that you have plans on plans on plans for them. I pray that we would all know how deep your love is, and that in our worst failures, you're still there, you still love. You don't just love us, you like us. Lord, I pray for this church that we would be a place that doesn't operate under a fear of failure, that we don't run from things, we run to things. And I pray that would permeate us. The world would see that our faith in you, our love for you makes us different. I pray for the person right now, Lord, who maybe doesn't have faith. Lord, I pray that you would tap them on the proverbial shoulder right now and let them know you're there. Move in their hearts in a way that only they would understand. In Jesus' name I pray.